All right, we're in, what are we, Job chapter 4? Or is it 5? We're in 5. Man, we're covering ground quick. We left off in verse 6. Oh, what are we? Oh. So did I. All right, Job chapter 5. And then remember, this is Eliphaz. He's still carrying on, and we saw last week how he ends up at the end of verse 5, or in verse 4 and 5, of getting really personal to Job of what took place. Let's just read it. He says, "Call now, if there be any that will answer thee, and to which of the saints wilt thou turn? For wrath killeth the foolish man, and envy slayeth the silly one. I have seen the foolish taking root, but suddenly I cursed his habitation. His children are far from safety, and they are crushed in the gate, neither is there any to deliver them." We saw last week that Job's children were crushed. So for him to even say that, put the word in a sentence, I am sure Job's just looking, you just see a man that's in pain. He's staring out from under his eyebrows, man. He just giving Eliphaz that look. He probably thinking, "I'd kill you if I could, but I'm not able to." In verse 5, he says, "Whose harvest the hungry eateth up, and taketh it even out of the thorns, and the robber swalloweth up their substance." And we saw that it was Job's substance was swallowed up by bands of thieves, except for the sheep. I believe the sheep were burned up. But the rest of the camels and the asses and everything else that he owned were stolen by bands of thieves. And then he says there, verse 6, where we left off, he says, "Although affliction cometh not forth of the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground, yet man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upward." Now, this is one of the popular verse that we use a lot. And if you've been saved any amount of time, or you've lived any amount of time, you know that verse 7 is absolutely true. But we'll look at verse 6 first. And even though you get a curse may come from the ground, and it does, it's not the source of affliction and trouble. That comes from two other places. And I'm not saying you won't ever get problems from the ground. I mean, thorns and thistles shall it bring forth. But that's really not the things that afflict and trouble you. I can tell you that human nature is the first thing. Human nature, it's people that that can afflict and trouble you. He said in James 4, verse 1 to 4, he said, From whence comes wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lust that war in your members? Ye lust and have not, ye kill, desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. You think about all of the affliction and all the trouble that war has caused. I've never been in a war. I've never had to fight in a war. We haven't had a war on the continental 48 states, since 1812, isn't it? Well, the Civil War, 1850, sorry. 65, yeah. Ended in 65. Man, I forgot about the Civil War. I'm thinking about a foreign war, though, where you got foreign troops on there. It's still war's war. But the personal stuff, yeah.
I've been in a war one time when I was in the Air Force. We had one day where the email went down.
Man, how did you ever survive it? We've got them first world problems, not third world problems. E-Day. What did you call it? E-Day. E-Day, the day email went down. But you'll see human nature at its worst when it comes to war. That's when it's at its worst. In 1 Timothy 6:10, he says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." Human nature. to get what they want, to get what they're lusting after, they'll do anything. I mean, we see that with these politicians, man. All you got to do is watch these politicians. They will say anything. They will, Biden's promising the world. Bernie is too. And I'm thinking, man, who's going to pay for all this mess they're talking about? I guess they keep looking at me, and me and you. But you say, well, isn't it about power? Yeah, but it's about money. Everything's basically about the love of money. I guess we did find out that it's not easy to buy an election, but you got to admit, man, Bloomberg didn't do a very good job they just roasted him alive. He should have spent a couple million on how to debate. I think that would have went, huh? Yeah, personality class. I mean, he did. He came off as an elitist. He really did. So, one more to crash and burn. That's okay with me. There's a saying, the only thing wrong with the country is the city. The first city that was ever built, it was built by, right? Built by Cain. They named it after his boy, Enoch. Said Cain knew his wife, conceived, and bare Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. So the first person to build a city was a murderer. Where most crime is, right? It's in the city. Yeah. I mean, man, you go to Chicago, you're taking your life in your own. You're going into a war zone. So human nature, man, if there's any affliction or trouble, human nature can bring it on. But there's another one that can bring it on, and that's the spiritual world. There's a whole spiritual realm out there that most people are completely unaware of. I mean, while they're checking around the corner for Casper, the friendly ghost, they don't realize that there are spiritual elements all around us, spiritual beings all around us, and they will cause us problems if they can. Look at Ephesians chapter 6, and I know you're all familiar with these verses. Ephesians 6:12, then we'll look at verse 16. He says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness. See, you can't just say it's the government. It's the man. It's more than that. It's spiritual wickedness in high places. You say, what's that entail? Well, evidently there's a lot of it. We'll talk about this more Sunday because I'm kind of getting into this. But it's more than just the devil. Sometimes we think all there is the devil. He's the only adversary we got. Well, I got news for you. You got more than just him. And it's spiritual. He said in verse 16, above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith we shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. So somebody else that can afflict you or trouble you is the spirit world. And not just human nature. Usually the ground, although it's got a curse on it, is not going to cause you that much grief. Verse 7, probably one of the greatest verses in the book of Job, and that goes along with chapter 14, verse 1, if you want to look there. In Job 14:1, it says, man that is born of a woman is a few days and full of trouble. Man, those things, it just rings so true. Oh, yeah. Few days and full of trouble. He said in verse 7, though, yet man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward. I guess the shortness, when you're watching, I love to watch a campfire. And when you're watching a campfire, there's always some sparks flying off, and they're short in duration. At least you hope they are. When they fly off they're short in duration. And I think the sparks are a picture of your life. Short in duration, but trouble nonetheless, going up in flames. So, when you think about it, we're born fallen. We're born fallen. He said in Psalm 39:5, behold, thou hast made my days as a handbreadth, and mine age is as nothing before thee. Verily, every man at his best state is altogether vanity, Selah. So We're born fallen, and the best, he says, the best we can be is vanity. You know, we look at this world, and I'll tell you what, we get the wrong view of this planet. Sometimes we think man's got a handle on it. He really doesn't. He really doesn't. You ever thought about you might be in control of overseeing something, and you think to yourself sometimes, if they only knew how little I know. If they only knew how I really don't know what to do next. Well, that's probably true for everybody that's running everything. They really don't know what to do. They're born fallen, and at their best state, it's altogether vanity. If the best state's altogether vanity, then what's the worst state? Look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, and we get an idea. I don't know where this came from, but man is the measure of all things. And man's not the measurement of anything. He's a mess. But that's your philosopher, that's your philosophy today, that man is the measure of all things. Well, if that's the case, then we're in trouble. In 2 Timothy 3, verse 1, we get an idea of how bad man can get. And by the way, we're living in the last days. You and I are living in the last days. So all of this should be true. And we should be able to see it. And I think we surely can. He says, this know also, chapter 3, verse 1, that in the last days perilous times shall come. I keep looking for that. You see, this... I look for a series of events. Now, the Lord could bring something on this country that neither you or I expected. But I've thought of everything from a super volcano to a X-flare from the sun that knocked out the grid. I mean, I've thought about other things. I thought about financial collapse. When they were talking about this coronavirus thing, you know what the Fed had to do lately? They had to cut 0.5 point. Well, I think we're at 1.5 left now. I mean, we're already low. We're almost to zero. So they've only got maybe 3 more arrows in their quiver, and we're at zero. Then they start paying you to borrow the money when you go to negative interest rate. And the reason they do that is because they see this thing coming that they can't control, and they got to keep a handle on it. So they start throwing money at it. They start printing money. They start lowering interest rates. But they see it coming, and there's nothing they can do about it. The coronavirus brought the thing on. I watch it. You don't know how many times, man, I think it gets right up to the edge, and then it backs off. I think, missed that one. But one of these days, right over the edge. If we're still here, and God forbid, but if we're still here, you better be a little ready for that. You better think about it. Because, you know when I say they don't really know what they're doing? They don't really know what they're doing. They really don't. And once the thing gets out of control, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Because once you lose confidence in the currency, it's all gone. You understand that? Everybody runs to the bank, get their money to buy something. Why? Because they're losing their money to inflation. If you found out that everything you had in the bank is worth 25% less than yesterday, what would you do? And nobody's going to tell you different. You're going to run to your bank, get your money, and you're going to buy food with it or something while you can. And you see what happens? Well, everybody to lose confidence, and the thing just starts selling, or the inflation keeps going up and higher and higher. Then there's a run on the banks, and they lock out the banks. Then there's pandemonium and rioting because they're not going to give you your money. Don't you know that? Ask your bank. If you had $50,000 in the bank, you go up to your teller and say, I like $50,000 and I like those in $20 bills, please. They'll laugh at you. They'll say, I might be able to get you a couple thousand today in 20s, maybe 50s. But it may take weeks to get that kind of money. He'll tell you. You can't just go get your money. People don't realize that. Get to where I was. I'm going off on something I probably shouldn't. Bothers people. Did I read I did read 2 Timothy chapter 3, didn't I? No. Okay. He said there in verse 1, for this know also the last days perilous times shall come. That's what I commented on. For men shall be lovers of their own selves. And by the way, if that means what it says what it means. Paul's talking to the church. Do you really think we're going to escape this without something happening? Man, I'll tell you what, Lord, be gracious if we did. Men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness. They all still go to church. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. He said that's what's going to happen in the last time. And that be man at his worst state. I'm encouraged when I hear about a tornado ripping through a neighborhood in Tennessee and everybody in that neighborhood getting together and helping one another. But that's not always the case. You take a big town like Chicago, you let a tornado rip through Chicago and see what happens. It'll literally tear itself apart. I mean, what the tornado didn't destroy, the rest of the neighborhood will. It's what you have to deal with. But I'm encouraged when I see that. But it's not everybody that's in the same boat. It's people that are coming to help that have the means. When everybody's on their own, it kind of might be just a little bit different. Now, it shouldn't be that way for us. That's the reason why you always want to belong to a local church, and a good local church. Could save your life, could save your family's life. Because between all of us, we do have resources. I mean, I got beans and rice, man. I mean, you won't love me for it, but it'll keep you alive. Huh? Yeah. But we're born fallen, and we're subject to vanity. Subject to vanity. In Romans chapter 8, verse 20 to 22, he said, for the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who has subjected the same in hope. Now, I got to think about that. You know why it's vanity? Well, we've been subjected to because nothing we have lasts. That's why it's vain. When we were studying the book of Ecclesiastes, the thing he kept saying was, all my labor, all that I do, all that I accomplish, it's vanity and vexation. Why? I can't keep it. I can't hold on to it. I can't have it. Man, this is our existence until the Lord comes back. Now, we can do eternal things, thank God. But you think about the rest of these folks around here, they don't understand how vain their life is. And they're subject to that vanity. He says, because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption. Everything we know rots, including these bodies. Eventually, give it time, it'll rot, corrupt, rust. The bondage of corruption unto the glorious liberty of the children of God, for we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain until now. You are born to a universe that will not last. You are born to a body that will not last. You are born into a system that's controlled by a fallen creature. Think about that. That will not last. 2 Corinthians 4:4, in whom the God of this world, that's Satan, hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. Most people don't ever think and don't ever realize, and sometimes we don't give it too much thought, that the devil's running this show. This planet that we're on right now, he is the God of this world, and he is running it. Now, I realize God can do whatever he wants and interject whatever he wants, but you do see the world going toward an Antichrist government. I realize we're in a little bit of a hiccup or something. I don't know what we're in. I don't know if it's there to just fail under this type of system so that it automatically goes to that system. Or it's like what Brother Keith said about the pendulum, that once it swings back, it'll swing back the other way. regardless, it's coming. That one world system is coming. And people are born into a system where the devil's running the show. The devil said in Luke 4:6, and the devil said unto him, talking to Jesus Christ, all this power will I give thee, and the glory of them. He's talking about all the nations that he just showed him of the world. For that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will give it. Well, you can't give something you don't have. He has it. When Israel failed, the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdoms of this world, automatically defaulted to him. He's running the show. Talk about vanity. And you're born into a world that lieth in wickedness. 1 John 5:19, we know that we are of God, and the whole world lieth in wickedness. You don't have to live too long. I mean, young people, they don't normally see it. I can't help but see it every time a politician opens their mouth. Every time I hear a newscast, I mean, I say, well, that's wicked as hell. That what that guy said? That's wicked. He's a liar. I mean, because I've been around. I know I hear all their promises. Promise. Do you realize why Trump is so popular? He's the only one that's ever got up and said, I'm going to do this, and he did it. Not even Ronald Reagan did everything he said he'd do. And Ronald Reagan was a great president. Donald Trump, man, I mean, he's got this mouth on him. I think he's hilarious. I mean, that guy could do comic relief. But he inflames, he makes everybody so angry. But the rest of the country, the people that hate him going, yeah, but he still does what he says. Everything he's promised, he's tried. In fact, he's accomplished things even though he's had an enormous amount of people against him. You've got to give him that. I'll say this about him. I hope he's saved. And if he's not saved, I hope he gets saved. Because and this is the thing I draw from him, if Christians had the tenacity that man had and the skin that he had, we'd have won the world by now. I'm not kidding you. He doesn't let anything stop him, and he is just tenacious. I wish I had that. I wish I could be that tenacious. But nothing stops that guy, and he's had everything thrown at him. He just keeps on going. And he just focuses on what he has to do. Now, I know he talks, but he gets it done too. Oh, they can't hardly last 6 months with him. He works them to death. But he himself is up every morning. I mean, how can this man go like that? But he does. Yet man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upward. You know what the saying at Treblinka and Buchenwald was? The only way out is up the stack. Now, I'll shorten that a little bit. The only way out for us is up. Thank God it ain't up the stack. Trouble. Boy, you think about human nature. When Nazi Germany did that, well, they were shoving people in an oven and burning people to ash to the tune of about 6 million. They were 95% literate. But you come back, tell me all they needed was an education. They had an education. In fact, it took brains to put together how you could kill that many people and get rid of their bodies. It took some real minds to figure that out. So, that's what a university education will do for you. How can we get more in the ovens, and how can we do? I mean, it was like a factory the way they set that thing up. Horrible. But here's the thing: yet without trouble, we're useless ministers of God. We got to have it. We're born unto it. I know that, but even as a Christian, you straighten up your life. You don't want any more trouble, but you're going to have it, because if you didn't, God couldn't use you the way He wants to. In 1 Corinthians 8:2, it says, if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. And if you're just around a while, you live for a while. And I'll say this, sometimes I used to look at some of these older brethren when I was a younger brethren. I look at some of the older brethren and I say, compromiser. Yeah, I didn't know what they knew. I hadn't been down the road that they had walked, and I hadn't seen the suffering that they had seen or the circumstances that folks they had to minister to. And I'll tell you what experience will do. It'll soften you a little. Maybe you won't be so hard on folks. So just be willing to learn, and God will show you. In 2 Corinthians 1:4, it says, who comforteth, I'll get it out in a minute, who comforteth us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. Well, you can't have that comfort unless you're going through something that's discomforting. You know what I mean? You got to have trouble. And God does that. Here's what Dr. Ruckman said. He said 7 things here. He said, problems are sent our way to make us think. Criticism comes our way to get us to check on ourselves. There's nothing like criticism. How many of you hate criticism? I do. But then I had, and what you should do is at least look at the criticism, think, is there any truth to it? Usually there is. And use it to correct yourself. Nobody likes criticism, though. Pain comes our way to teach us patience. Well, a lot of you know that. Sorrow pays us a visit to make us sympathetic. Nothing like going through some things yourself. You see, these 3 characters that are almost tormenting Job, I wonder what they've lost. I just kind of wonder. Do they know what loss really is? Have they ever lost a child? I mean, if you ever lost a child, man, you know some pain I don't know. I don't want to know it. But I do want to take note that I don't understand it and keep my mouth shut. I've had situations where I'm around people that have lost children, and, I might want to say, I probably would say something if that hadn't happened, but I keep my mouth shut. So why? It didn't happen to me, and I don't want it to happen to me. I don't want the devil going up there and saying, why don't you see if he can handle it? So I'm careful. People go through things that I haven't gone through. I'm not going to judge them. Disappointments come our way to keep us humble. A few of those. Number 6, fear overwhelms us to engender righteousness. Now I think he's talking about the fear of God there. And the last one is difficulties come one after another to teach us to depend on God and have no confidence in the flesh. And those are experience, man, just time. And eventually, you're gonna have your time on the rack, and it can change how you feel about things. And I'm not talking about changing anything doctrinal, okay? It just, after you've gone through it, you don't feel as impervious as you once did, and you realize that you probably didn't react near as well as you thought you might. See, that's the thing. It's okay to look at somebody and say, I just wish they would have reacted better, but then you go through it and you say, now I understand. Because you don't know the suffering till you're in it. Okay. Let's read I'm going to get through some verses here. I'm sorry. Verses 8 to verse 16. We'll read all of them together. And this is Eliphaz talking against, or still, he says, I would seek unto God, and unto God would I commit my cause, which doeth great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number, who giveth rain upon the earth and sendeth waters upon the fields, to set up on high those that be low, that those which mourn may be exalted to safety. He disappointeth the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the froward is carried headlong. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope in the noonday as in the night. But he saveth the poor from the sword, and from their mouth, and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor hath hope, and iniquity stoppeth their mouth. So he's kind of waxing eloquent there. And he's glorifying the Lord there. Everything that he says is so. And it's very glorifying. There's nothing inaccurate about it. Eliphaz, and this is just my take on it, Eliphaz has inserted himself in what we call conundrum. Okay? And think about these things. God does not do to men who walk upright that which he has done to Job. That's the first thing. Show me anybody else in the Bible that God ever knocked off their feet and did what he did to Job. And the Bible says Job feared God and eschewed evil. There's nobody like that, right? Okay, well, that's the first thing. The second thing is Job is accusing God of all kinds of wrongdoing. I mean, when we start going through here, man, Job is like, I am upright. I refuse to give up my integrity. I mean, he's just, he just beating the drum there. And the three friends are watching it, and all of a sudden they become righteously indignant. And they stand up for God. Eliphaz runs to God's defense. But while he's running to God's defense, he condemns Job outright. And you know what the conundrum is? Eliphaz ends up on the wrong side of this. And he hasn't said a false thing yet. It's just who he's applying it to. There's one verse, Romans 14:4. Probably every Christian should commit it to memory. It says, who art thou that judgeth another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth. Yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. And that is, you just got to be careful how you judge somebody. Here's the thing. Unless you have this particular job, you really don't have to judge. Now, in Eliphaz, think about this a second. Does Eliphaz have any proof of evil doing? Does he? We say, well, the devastation, yeah, but I mean, does he have photographs or does he have a recording or a video of Job doing something that's evil? No, he doesn't. All he sees is the aftermath around him, but he is making the assumption, you did something, buddy. Something evil about you, or God wouldn't have done this. But what he could have done is, I don't understand this, Lord. I've known this man for years and years and years. I don't understand. And you know what? If you don't understand, the best thing you do is step back and don't make a judgment. Wait till the Lord reveals the thing. But they couldn't stand it. They just had to defend God. I'm going to defend the Lord. I don't care what you say. And they ended up on the side where the God says, you better go talk to your friend Job. He better pray for you, or you're going to be seeing me and not in good spirits. I mean, think about that. He wound up on the backside, on the bad side of this thing, and he was defending God. Just be careful. A lot of people do that with the Jews, don't you think? Those evil Jews. Very careful. Blood for the Father's sake. It's a good lesson for Stephen Anderson. He'll find out. We could make a lot of practical application, but to move on, there are 5 things connected with the tribulation that is in this passage of Scripture. The first thing is the rain that he mentions. Psalm 68, let me just read some of these verses. Psalm 68, verse 8 and 9 says, the earth shook, the heavens also dropped at the presence of God. Even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, the God of Israel. Thou, O God, didst send a plentiful rain, whereby thou didst confirm thine inheritance when it was weary. Thy congregation hath dwelt therein. Thou, O God, hast prepared of thy goodness for the poor. And the poor is mentioned in this passage with the rain. Remember, this is going to be a picture of the tribulation period. And when you get to the end of that 3.5-year drought, what do you have? You have the latter and former rains show up. And we'll talk about this, but when we talk about the poor in the Bible, you realize that most of the time it's referring to somebody in the tribulation period who can't take the mark of the beast and buy or sell. They are the poor. A lot of times we keep applying this thing over and over again to people that, are lazy. No, they're just the lazy. The Bible has something for them. It says if they don't want to work, they ought not eat. But we're talking about somebody that's poor because the world has made them poor. They're oppressed. They're afflicted. Why? They can't buy food. And they're literally waiting on people to give them a handout. Hosea 6:3 says, then shall we know, if we follow on to know the Lord, his going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come unto us as the rain, as the latter and former rain unto the earth. Of course, the charismatics got this some type of spiritual awakening or something. It has nothing to do with it. So what is it? Rain. It's after 3.5 years drought when the entire Middle East is parched. He brings all the rain, the former rain and the latter rain. What you get the former rain would be your springtime. The latter rain would be your fall rains, and he brings them all in 1 month. Why? He's trying to rejuvenate an area over there. And that's his way of helping out these poor Israelites. He mentions those set up on high. Notice what he says there. To set up on high those that be low, and those which more may be exalted to safety. What's that sound like to you? It sounds like a post-tribulation rapture to me. To set up on high those that be low. Revelation 11:12, where you've got Moses and Elijah, the two witnesses, they go up. Those that be low, exalted high. Those that which mourn, exalted to safety. You apply that to apply that to our rapture if you want. And then he mentions the crafty. And I got to read back here. He says, he disappointeth the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. Now, you've got examples of this in the Old Testament, like Tobiah, Geshem the Arabian, Ahithophel, the counsel of Ahithophel, that against David, that he was given to Absalom, that was defeated. And you think of two figures, Hitler, his counsel ended up being, he wanted to annihilate the Jews all over Europe. That ended up being defeated, so that his hands couldn't perform the enterprise. I think of Khrushchev. Khrushchev wanted to destroy America, but God didn't let that happen, at least not yet. But the crafty, and he mentions their enterprise. And it's interesting, in Revelation 18, verse 22 and 23, he says, the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. Sound of the millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. He goes on, talks about the light of the candle and so on and so forth. And he's talking about Babylon. And he's talking about it being the center of trade. It's an enterprise. And God brings that thing to naught. It looks like it ends up getting nuked. Well, the Lord's involved in all that. But let me go over here and read in Revelation chapter 18. Oops. Verse 11 and 12. It says, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and of silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen, purple and silk and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner of vessels of ivory, and all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and of brass and iron and marble. He goes on, cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves, and last is the souls of men. What God shuts it down. So their enterprise is put to an end there. Then he mentions that there's darkness in the daytime. Well, Revelation 16:10, the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. And there's three more references. Deuteronomy 28:29 says, and thou shalt grope at noonday, as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee. Now, I think he's referring to Israel there in that passage. But also Job 12:25 says, They grope in the dark without light, and he maketh them to stagger like a drunken man. Isaiah 59:10 says, we grope for the wall like the blind, and we grope as if we had no eyes. We stumble at noonday as in the night. We are in desolate places as dead men. And one of these days, before the Lord comes back, just before he comes back, he turns out the lights. And this whole world's just going to be in nothing but darkness. And this says darkness in the daytime. And the last part of it is he talks about saving the poor. And again, I was telling you, the poor in the tribulation would be those who refuse the mark of the beast. They're saved from, you'll see there in the passage, they're saved from the sword. Verse 15, but he saveth the poor from the sword, from their mouth, and from the hand of the mighty. And I can apply all those. The sword is the armies of the Antichrist. Revelation 19:19, I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. Dr. Ruckman brought up something about that. He said, they know who Jesus Christ is and they know he's coming back. Because you can't just, put an army together in 30 minutes. And it says the army is to fight against him that sat on the horse and against his army. Evidently, he is well known at this point because of a mid-trib appearance. He's not hiding himself. They know he's there. And they know, and at this point, they know he's coming back. Because that's what it says, to make war against him. Wow. It says their mouth. And now the only thing I could come up with, it was Revelation 13:4-7. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. Well, he ends up speaking against these Jews, and that's one of the things they're fighting against. Not only just against the sword, but against the politician's mouth. You get the wrong politician, and they can put a big hurt on you. Bernie Sanders could really hurt us. There's given him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given to him to continue 42 months. Then he mentions there, delivered from the hand of the mighty. There's two other references in the Bible. It says the hand of the mighty, and both of them are referring to the enemy's hands. And Job 6:23 says, or deliver me from the enemy's hand, or redeem me from the hand of the mighty. Ezekiel 31:11 says, I have therefore delivered him into the hand of the mighty, one of the heathen. He shall surely deal with him. I have driven him out for his wickedness. So when Israel got out of the way, he would deliver them into the hand of the mighty. He's talking about the poor being delivered from the hand of the mighty. Also, Revelation 6:15, he says, the kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the chief captains and the mighty men and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountain. Notice the mighty men are hiding themselves at that point. So it looks like when he refers to the mighty men there, he's talking about the enemy. He's talking about the powers that be down here. He said, the poor hath hope. Last thing he says there. And if you check the references, you'll find a lot of references about the hope of Israel. What is the hope of Israel? Anybody know? What's the hope? Resurrection. That's the hope of Israel. That's our hope. Looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior. The blessed hope is him calling us up. And we're coming up. It's a sure hope, but that's the hope. And that's the hope of Israel, is the resurrection. With all that, and I realize I just went through a bomb worth of stuff there that deal with the tribulation, there's a practical application to all of it too. And Paul takes one of these verses and quotes it. I think it's interesting, stuff that would apply, let's say, for the tribulation, yet he's pulling that thing and applying it in a verse. In fact, it's 1 Corinthians 3:19. He says, for the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And that's the Apostle Paul quoting right from the book of Job. You'll find Paul doing that, where he takes a verse. That's why we say it has the Scripture can have three applications. It can have a historical, a doctrinal, and a practical application or spiritual application. So just because we're reading something and I say, okay, we're going to doctrinally apply this to the tribulation, does not mean that you can't draw a practical application from it. And the proof of that is here Paul is making a practical application of a book that is clearly about the tribulation. We can historically apply it to Job, doctrinally apply it to the tribulation, but practically we can apply every bit of it to our life some way. A practical application. When Paul says this, who's he talking to? He's talking to the Corinthians, right? Guess what that's close to? Athens. Same area. And Athens is the place where, wisdom. He says he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. Acts 17, just read Acts 17, and he had a time with them of Athens. He could barely win any of them because they were so, all they cared about was hearing something new and hearing about some new God. And he had a difficult time dealing with them. Why? The wisdom of this world. And the Bible says he taketh them in their own craftiness. The Lord's good at that. He'll take somebody that, they think they're so smart and he fixes them good. Especially when they push this aside. I could probably mention a few folks that, or a few examples of that. I think I even wrote down a couple, but I need to quit. Right offhand, I can't think of anybody. Well, give me a philosopher. Socrates. There's a good one. Lord, give them just enough rope to hang themselves. Just enough to think, yeah, I got it figured out. And they don't have it figured out. He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. Okay. Anybody have any comments or? I think y'all just went, this avalanche came at you just like,